Hello, everyone. This is your host, Irsa Khalid, and I welcome you all to another episode of Conversation with the Diplomat by Diplo TV. Diplo TV is an initiative of the Diplomatic Insight, which is Pakistan's premier foreign policy and diplomacy platform for over 17 years. We believe in peace through informed dialogue, and this show is one of the flagship platform to further that vision. My dear fellows, diplomacy is the strategic art of shaping destinies through dialogue. As the legendary diplomat Madeleine Albright once said, true diplomacy requires the ability to put yourself into the other person's shoes. It is through this deep empathetic understanding that a shared destiny is nurtured and strengthened. And that is the heartbeat of the show. We are here to delve into the minds, the personalities, and the lived experiences of those who carry the weight of a nation on their shoulders. Speaking of which, today's episode is particularly special. Our guest today is distinguished representative of Pakistan who is currently building a vital bridge between South Asia and the lion city of Southeast Asia. Yes, you have guessed it right. She is serving as the High Commissioner of Pakistan to Singapore and is playing a pivotal role in strengthening bilateral ties between the two nations. Please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Ms. Rabia Shafiq. Greetings to you, ma'am.
Assalamu alaikum, Irsa. Thank you so much for having me here.
Viewers, let me tell more about our guest. Ms. Rabia Shafiq holds a master's degree in public administration from Qaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, and a postgraduate diploma in diplomatic studies from the University of Oxford, UK. She joined the Foreign Service of Pakistan in 2001 and has since held various key positions. Her diplomatic postings include Pakistan's missions in Paris, Ankara, and Chicago. Since June 2024, she has been serving as the High Commissioner at the Pakistan High Commission in Singapore. Her Excellency, I'm honored and grateful that you took time for us and became a part of this series. Welcome to Diplo TV. My first question from you is beyond the formal demands of diplomacy, there's always a personal story that shapes the individual. Can you share a bit about your background and what motivates you at a deeper level?
Thank you, Irsa. I think every person is, again, as you said, it's motivated by something, be it in their personal lives or professional lives. I think my motivation would be a constant drive to learn, particularly new things, curiosity, asking questions, knowing more. Um, in addition to that, I think meeting people from different cultures, listening to their stories. I think that really tells you a lot about what motivates a person, and what's the story behind their struggle or their journey. So I think those would be my motivations. And as you said, I'm very honored to be the first woman ambassador to be on your show.
Right. Thank you. You talked about you were interested in listening the stories of other people, and it is really, mind-blowing experience. So, can you recall any story which has really moved you?
I think top of my head, it would be hard to recall one story, but I think generally the stories which resonate with oneself is that one all those stories where people are doing something not for themselves, but when they are doing something with a sense of purpose and service to make lives of other people's better. Be it any idea or any small things that they did. So I think that is really something that that sticks in one's mind. Just as you mentioned, I just remembered a story of a person. She's a very dynamic lady, and she came to meet me here in Singapore. She's from Lahore, and she's very passionate about children's education. And how I came across to her was that, her story is very powerful. And in fact, I would, very briefly want to narrate that story. That she had done maybe her sort of metric, and then she had some time in between. And she said that there was like a small basti near to where she lived, and she obviously saw a lot of children. So one day she said that she took a bag full of some pencils, stationery, some copies, things like that, and she took that to and along with some food, along with some candies and food. So she took that to that. that place just to so she could interact with kids, make some friends, maybe distribute the candies, food, and give them some stationery, school books, all of those things. So she said a lot of kids, of course, surrounded her when she went there, and a lot of kids, sort of went for the food and went for the candies. But she said in one corner there was a small kid, maybe about 5 or 6 years old, and she said, I mean, I still remember the story because it was so vivid. She said that the kid was wearing he had a sort of a kameez on, but without any pants. And the kid was standing there, and kept pointing to her back. So she thought that like all kids, maybe this kid also wanted a candy, so she took
Right.
one out. But apparently, this kid was pointing towards a pencil and the school book, and the like a copy. So he wanted that. So she said that that's how the idea struck to her, and she said that she would maybe start educating children. And I found that story very, very powerful. So and then she obviously went on to build a school, and now that school has expanded. It's got maybe over 1,000 children, and she's educating the underprivileged.
That's a wonderful story, I must say. And sometimes these little small moments can ignite a great vision in you, and you can actually, execute and further that way. And that is really inspiring. Um, uh, Miss Rabia, the path to diplomacy is often rigorous and challenging. Reflecting on your early career, could you share a moment that truly tested your resilience and contributed significantly to your growth?
It's hard to talk about one moment, but as a young officer, when you start working, there are a lot of high pressure moments, a lot of deadlines which you have to meet, late hours because the kind of work we are in. I mean, there are no set hours because you're dealing with countries all across the world which are in different time zones. So you have to liaise with them. So a lot of these things which really test one's patience, I would say. But along with that, I think what they teach you is to be very adaptable. I think that is something because you really can't be rigid. The line of work that we are in, I mean, you can't really follow 9 to 5 working hours.
Of course.
It's much, much beyond that. In terms of your personal work, in terms of your professional requirements that you have to fulfill, so it goes much beyond that. So, I mean, once I started to work, I think there was a senior colleague and he gave me an advice. At that time, I could not fully understand the essence of it. But they said that, being a diplomat is not just a profession, it's a lifestyle. And, once you put in a few years yourself, so you truly understand the meaning of that because, your life never stops. Your professional life never stops. It's not that once you leave the office and you come home, you can just switch
Yeah.
off. So you are a diplomat inside out then. Uh,
Right.
so I think that is something that you learn quite early on in your career.
And what inspired you to become a diplomat and join foreign service and, live such life?
Well, apart
Was
from
there
the
any moment or you decided it very early on?
not very early on. In fact, I, as you mentioned in my introduction also, that, I have a master's in public administration. And in addition to that, I also have a business administration degree.
Right.
So basically, what I thought was, I would follow the corporate path. So I started to work in a bank for a while, and then, I didn't think that my temperament was as such to be able to continue that job. And I was interested in sort of global politics, what all was going around. And it was in interesting times because I started working in 2001. So that was the time, when we had the war on terror, we had the September 11
Exactly.
attacks.
9/11.
We were
Right.
seeing the world change very rapidly and in a very different direction.
Exactly.
And again, being in Pakistan, where you are in a difficult and challenging neighborhood, I would say. So, because we were very close to the area of conflict, which was Afghanistan, um,
Right.
you could see the impacts of that conflict on Pakistan, on the lives of common people, and one truly begins to see how the global affairs are really affecting your own country while you are probably living in your own country, but you're not truly isolated from all these world events. So I think bit by bit these things begin to sort of fill in the bigger picture. and your interest bit by bit begins to develop gradually, just to see how all these developments are linked. There's a causal effect, of course, and how these affect lives of ordinary people who probably don't really have a direct connection, but they are being affected. So probably there's not one moment where I sort of realized that, but slowly along the way, I think this path primarily chose me,
Okay.
instead of the other way around.
Exactly. As a woman in diplomacy, do you feel your perspective brings a distinct dimension to your work? Um,
Yes, I absolutely. I absolutely feel that women do bring a different perspective to the table, particularly because women are sort of more attuned towards building consensus, towards conflict, sort of avoidance or conflict prevention.
right.
Um, and then women, I think, are although it goes to the popular to the contrary belief, but I feel that women are better listeners also, instead of just talking. So
Right.
I feel all those things are enriching for your diplomatic career. I feel that it's very important for women to have a place on the table, because sometimes all these issues are affecting women very differently. For example, if you talk about conflict, that is having different impacts on different populations, and it is very critical to have a voice on the table to be able to safeguard those interests of those populations. I feel so truly. I feel that women do have a different perspective. In terms of I think the ability to even navigate your personal life along with your professional life, I think women
Exactly.
have a better sense of balance.
And
Um,
how do you balance your life?
Sorry?
And how do you balance your life as a
Um,
woman, especially?
that is a constant challenge and a constant struggle. I think every day, all women, be it in any profession, I think
Right.
more so with diplomacy, because there's an added angle of changing countries
Exactly.
every few years. So obviously that adds a different complexion to the whole thing. But it is challenging, I would say, and it needs a lot of support.
Give
I
us a
think.
tip. Give us a tip. How do you manage it?
Um, One thing that I feel that women do manage better, it's time. You are very conscious of the time we have, and I think I keep on saying that to everybody who cares to listen. That I think time is the rarest commodity we have, and this is sometimes I feel that countries, or even people who are economically sort of more in need, and you would feel that they would use this resource more judiciously. You see the opposite of it, so you see people who you think should be working to make more money, they would be wasting more time. So that is, I think, paradoxical, but I think better time management is one thing. And then it goes without saying that if you have supportive family members around you, that really eases your job. I think that is something very, very critical. So I think word of appreciation is required for all the supportive family members, friends, colleagues we have
Exactly.
all around us.
Right. Ms. Rabia, you have mentioned that you get to experience different cultures and different people, especially when you are in this field. Tell us about something in which you have noticed in Singapore, like any cultural practice or norm, which you really found that this is inspiring or unique or, surprising. So just share with us.
Yes, of course. I feel that the good aspect, or the I think the best aspect of our job is that you get to travel from one place to the other, and you get to see all the good practices they have. So one could take inspiration from that. I've been in Singapore for almost 2 years now, and I think when you look at their culture and when you look at the society, it's a very diverse society, because there are different populations, of course, here, but they all live very harmoniously. And that is something which is not inherent or innate. That is something which the government puts in a lot of effort to cultivate. They have different policies which encourage diversity, but which also encourage social cohesion.
For example, what kind of policies?
For example, they have a system of government housing, where
Okay.
government housing is provided at low cost to Singaporeans. And the one policy which I found very interesting when I got to know of it was that on one floor of that housing, because it's always a multi-story building, so on one floor of the housing they would have people from different ethnicities as neighbors. So it's not that one building on one floor would be dominated by a single group of ethnicity. So it just to sort of build cohesion, it just to build linkages, it just to sort of from this level on. The same goes for schools, the same goes for neighborhoods, community centers. So they follow that thing, and I feel that that is something really important,
Yeah,
because again in Pakistan we are all aware that we have a very diverse population, in terms
right.
of cultures, languages,
Exactly.
food, all of those things. But I feel that it's where also what we can sort of learn from Singapore is to have some policies which would inculcate and promote this social cohesion.
That is very interesting way of getting people to gel with each other and to get to know each other, and build connections with each other. Uh, for aspiring diplomats who look up to your journey, what practical advice would you offer beyond academic preparation? What should they focus on in the real world?
Right. Um, I get asked this question quite a lot, and it's obviously the advice keeps on varying from time to time. But these days, because we all keep on saying, and we all are seeing around ourselves that this is the age of information. We
Right.
have an overload of information. So two, three things I would sort of advise any of our young colleagues is that one is that develop that skill to sift fact from fiction, because there's so much of misinformation that is around us that we it's very hard to really gauge that. And of course there are ways to do that. I'm not going to delve into that, but that is, I think, one skill which we, not just young people, but I think every professional needs to have that. Know what is true and what is not, what all is around us in terms of news and information. The other thing that I really want people to focus on is to read. I think we have just done away with this culture of not reading, and we're
Exactly.
very used to these sound bites, and everything being summarized. Even if you use Chat GPT to give you a summary of the book or an article, I think that is useful. That would bring value, and that would add substance to your thinking and your opinions also, because I feel that a lot of us have opinions but those are not really grounded. So I feel that everybody's entitled to have their opinion, but you have to have reasons to justify that. So
Be
I feel,
logical. Be logical.
right, that too, and then sort of
Right.
have the arguments to back your opinion,
Right.
to do that. In addition to that, particularly for anyone thinking of joining the foreign ministry, I think apart from the traveling aspect, or the glamorous part, so to say,
Right. Right.
because life is very different at the headquarters, which is in Islamabad, and when you are posted in the embassies abroad. Um, the nature of work is very different, and the atmosphere is very different, and the requirements for each place are very different. So I think it's people
And what
coming.
is what is the main difference?
In terms of work, that is of course different from what you do in the embassies than what you do in the headquarters, because at the headquarters probably more focus would be on writing papers, analyzing, developing policy options, apart from the administrative work that you
Exactly.
would be doing. In the embassy, it's more so the implementation part. So you would be doing, probably you would be doing active diplomacy, going out, meeting people,
Right.
economic diplomacy, of course, because that is the new priority area. So you would be
Exactly.
focusing on developing business linkages, trade ties, all of those things, but practical things where you put the policy into action. So more so of that. So the nature of work is very, very different in two places. And when young colleagues join the ministry, I think they come with the notion that they would be posted out very soon, but that takes a while. That takes maybe a couple of years, 2 3 years before you could do so. So I think the adjustments have to be done in terms of expectations of what is expected of them, and how they can help the institution achieve its own goals. So those are a few things I think. Uh, and then because we are in the business of bureaucracy, of course. That's our mainstay. So bureaucracy does not give you very quick results. It's not like the private sector where you would start a project and you would see immediate results. With bureaucracy, it's a slow process. Sometimes because it's a hierarchical structure, sometimes you would start something and you would not see the end of it. Sometimes you would be in the middle of it. Sometimes you would be at the end of it. Somebody else would have started something. So it's a holistic way of looking at things, and there are no immediate results which would be visible in a short time. So I think one has to be mindful of that as well.
Right. So, what makes a true diplomat, and what a diplomat should do to, achieve their outcomes or their objectives?
I think at the outset, it's a very prestigious job because you're representing your country with great honor. But at the same time, it comes with heavy responsibility. As I said in the beginning, there are no fixed hours, and there
Right.
are no it's not that you can pick and choose what you could do, or you would, it's not that you would say that you choose this part of being a diplomat but not the tough part. So it's a whole package. um, uh, so being a good diplomat is creating opportunities. In one word, if you, or maybe two words if you ask me, is that creating opportunities. We When you look at Pakistan, I think we have a huge youth population. And the biggest service I think any diplomat could do is to make opportunities, make pathways for our young people. Um,
Yes.
so that is something I think in any whichsoever way, be it sort of education, in jobs,
Yeah.
to any which way you can contribute. I think we should focus on creating opportunities.
Okay. Ms. Rabia, despite years of experience, the pursuit of growth continues. Looking ahead, what personal or professional goals are you still engaged, eager to achieve?
Um, I think learning, as I said, because it's a continuous process. I don't think it ever stops, and I don't think it should ever stop. So I think that is something. Be it horizontal learning, because you obviously go from one country to the next, or vertical learning, where you delve deep into a subject and you build your specialization. I think that is something which continues to be a pursuit. Apart from that, I think being a woman, of course, I would always carry a soft spot in encouraging women, making the workplace a better place for women, because again, we all have our challenges, but being a woman from Pakistan who was also working in the public space, there are some peculiar challenges which women face. And I think this would continue to be a goal to make that space more comfortable and more
Right.
open and more authentic for women to sort of pursue their own objectives, their own goals. So I think those would be, and personal growth, of course, that is a huge agenda. I think if you look at your own personal um, mental, spiritual growth, I think that would, of course, continue to be a part
Yeah.
of
And it
myself.
should never stop.
Of course, of course,
Yeah.
agreed.
Uh, what advice would you give to a young woman like me that how should we project ourselves when, especially when we are in leadership roles? Because this is an irony, but women are not taken seriously, even when they are in the leadership roles.
Um, I would slightly disagree about the not being taken serious part. I think when you are sort of starting off your career, that was a feeling I also got.
Okay.
But I think you need to continue to build on your personal capability, because there's nothing, when as I say that, merit shines. There is nothing that would stop you if you know your job, if you know how to get it done. So there's nothing that can come in your way. About of course, as I said, working also brings a personal responsibility on your own self. Sometimes, not just women, I'm not talking about just women, but, sometimes people look for shortcuts in their careers for quicker growth and quicker results. That is something I feel that, it was always there, but I feel that, sometimes people I see, younger people around me, they seem more inclined towards following that. um, this is something I would feel that we should sort of, not look at, and we should, because there's nothing that can replace experience, and there's nothing that can replace hard work. These two things, as long as you are working, as long as you are active in your professional life, these two things would continue and should continue.
So be focused and be at the top of things, and you will get
Absolutely,
there
absolutely.
then. Okay, yes.
Know your trade, and especially for people in any field, I think you have to really build your relevance. Again, just to sort of give an example, about Singapore. It's a small country. It's a big country of about 6 million people. It does not have any natural resources, um, uh, but this small country has really built its relevance in the
Right.
world. So I think it's same goes for people. We have to really build our relevance, because and build our, sort of specialization, as I keep on saying, because, if you are dispensable, then you are dispensable. So, you really have to bring something extra to the table.
Okay. In the end, what message would you like to give to our viewers and to Diplo TV?
I think Diplo TV is doing a good job. People like you, young people like yourself, who are interested in global politics and what all is going around them, I think that is very essential. And that is very important, because the world is rapidly changing. It's changing at a very fast pace, and it's changing in a direction which nobody is sure of
Right.
till now. So I think I would really commend the good job that Diplo TV is doing. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors also.